Thank you very much, Umaru. Thank you also, Cardinal Turkson and President Sister Helen Alford, Professor Joachim von Braun, both for the initiative and the invitation, for being allowed to listen and learn from all of you present here. The Rainforest Foundation Norway has worked with Indigenous people and their organizations over 3 decades. I am neither Indigenous nor an academic. I'm just a humble practitioner. So thank you for allowing me to share some of our perspectives. The world is facing 2 existential crises, the climate crisis and the loss of nature and biodiversity. They are existential because they threaten our planet's life support system. And it is as simple and frightening as this. The climate will not be stabilized and loss of nature not halted unless rainforests are protected. All forests are important, yet some are more important than others. And here's why. Size. Size matters. Large, contiguous, intact forest landscapes are crucial for upholding Earth's life support systems, such as climate regulation, production and distribution of rainfall, maintenance of biological diversity, and the removal of CO2 from the atmosphere. Yet, high-integrity forests have declined by 12% between the year 2000 to 2020, and are increasingly threatened by fragmentation, encroachment, and degradation. Why? Climate financing rewards the reduction of deforestation, while few financial incentives reward the preservation of intact forest landscapes. Indigenous territories are among the best preserved natural environments on Earth, harboring great biodiversity and storing more carbon per hectare than evidenced by most other forms of governance. Our 2021 report, Falling Short, as just being quoted by Dr. Mirna, showed that less than 1% of climate funds for mitigation and adaptation went to Indigenous peoples and local communities' tenure in forest management. The Climate COP of Glasgow marked a breakthrough in the political recognition of Indigenous peoples and local communities and vowed to increase financial support, both by public and philanthropic pledges. Increasingly, Indigenous-led funds and funding mechanisms are now being developed, and the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities has launched the Shandia Vision, focusing on Indigenous people and local communities' direct access to funding. Getting back to size, the extreme diversity of species in rainforests is characterized by a small number of individual species per geographical unit. There can be hundreds or even thousands of meters between 2 trees of the same species. And as natural landscapes are divided, plants and animals struggle. Fragmentation of habitat is one of the great threats to global biodiversity. In forests, it can reduce biodiversity up to 75%, depending on the size of the fragment. Forest edges are less productive than interior forests. This means increased tree mortality, lower biodiversity, carbon storage, and water recycling capacity. The closer to the edge, the stronger the edge effect. There are 2 main drivers for this fragmentation: infrastructure development and agriculture. Today, more than 70% of the world's forests are within 1 kilometer of a forest edge, and almost 20% are within 100 meters from an edge. In the Brazilian Amazon alone, we are creating up to 50,000 kilometers of new forest edges every year. The ability of our planet to provide ecosystem services is directly linked to the spatial connectivity of natural landscapes. Large connected biomes enable the natural processes of migration, gene flow, adaptation, and nutrition recycling. All this contributes to genetic variability and resilience to environmental change. Therefore, climate and biodiversity goals can only be achieved if conservation focuses on the integral management of vast, contiguous natural landscapes and on restoring ecosystems connectivity where it has been lost. Indigenous peoples' holistic understanding of their territories is particularly conducive to effective conservation of large interconnected natural landscapes. I will illustrate this through two initiatives we are currently spearheading together with our indigenous partners. Let me take you into the heart of the Amazon, to the border region between Peru and Brazil. Here, we find the two largest areas worldwide where groups of indigenous people live in voluntary isolation from the outside world. Combined, these two corridors cover 250,000 square kilometers, 5% of the entire Amazon, an area larger than the United Kingdom and consisting almost entirely of intact rainforests. There's virtually no infrastructural development, and deforestation and degradation are very low. Combined, these areas stored 26 billion tons of CO2, equivalent to the United States emissions over 5 years. They harbor a richer biodiversity than most other places on Earth. Yet both areas are under increasing pressure from both legal and illegal activities such as logging, extractive industries, and road building. Decades of research have established that the unique indigenous societies living here are stewards of incredibly large and contiguous territory. Their historical presence and relationships with the forests are the very reason for the continued existence of these two well-preserved rainforest areas. Securing their tenure and human rights means preserving these rainforests and preventing the fragmentation of some of the largest contiguous intact rainforests left on Earth. Demonstrating their solidarity with the isolated indigenous peoples, Brazilian and Peruvian indigenous organizations have joined forces with us in this pioneering protection initiative. At the core is the involvement of hundreds of local communities forming a buffer zone around these corridors. Like one of their leaders told me, we are protecting our brothers and sisters, even though they may not be aware of it. The aim of this initiative is to strengthen local governance and tenure rights, enhance territorial management and protection so that these communities can act as on-the-ground barriers against emerging threats and as an alliance to influence political and commercial decision-making. If fully resourced, the protection of these two territorial corridors alone represent 0.6% of the global 30 by 30 target of the Convention of Biological Diversity. The other example is from Central Africa. It harbors the world's second largest rainforest. More than half of it is in the DR Congo. The local indigenous peoples descend from the very first people to inhabit the Central African rainforest some 100,000 years ago. They are the stewards of knowledge, of biodiversity, and of the interconnectedness of this vast Central African biome. Until recently, little was known about the extent of these indigenous peoples' territories in the DRC. This knowledge gap, combined with a complete lack of official acknowledgement of indigenous peoples in DRC, prevented progress in the recognition of their tenure rights. A mapping initiative by the indigenous representative organization Dynamique des Groupes des Peuples Autochtones, DGPA, showcases the location and extent of these territories. It is a scientific tool presenting the location, history, and culture of indigenous peoples in relation to protected areas, forest concessions, intact forests, mining permits, petroleum permits, and even vegetation types. Following the major victory of 2022 law for indigenous peoples' land rights, together with DGPA and allies, Rainforest Foundation Norway developed a strategy for the legal recognition and sustainable management of these more than 240,000 square kilometers of contiguous rainforest, an area the size of the United Kingdom. This is the singularly most significant contribution to secure the protection and interconnectivity of the Central African rainforest. To bring you back to the beginning, it's long been known that we need to protect the remaining rainforest, stabilize the climate, and halt the loss of nature and biodiversity. Now, we also know that they need to be protected at landscape level. Size, contiguity, and connectivity are essential to the preservation of rainforests in their ability to provide vital ecosystem services and mitigate climate change. Many indigenous people, through their traditional stewardship, preserve and protect rainforests at the vast landscape level that is necessary. Today, we focus on this intimate connection between extensive contiguous natural landscapes, biodiversity preservation, climate change mitigation, and the knowledge and practices of indigenous people. This understanding must be embedded in the national biodiversity plans currently being developed, aiming, and I quote Target 1 of the CBD Convention, to bring the loss of areas of high biodiversity importance, including ecosystems of high ecological integrity, close to zero by 2030, while respecting the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, end of quote. This means safeguarding rainforests in their entirety, no less. It is not possible to halt the loss of biodiversity by conserving rainforests or other high productive landscapes in bits and pieces. To put this into action requires landscape-level rainforest protection by indigenous people. New resources must go through viable existing channels and supporting emerging IPLC-led mechanisms through a combination of public and private funding, international cooperation, and innovative financing. No less is required to save the well-being of our planet and humankind. Thank you.